I am just unboxing a intake manifold. It's the $125 Chinese that everybody's got for sale all over the internet, including eBay. And I'm in the middle of rebuilding the diff. But this manifold is, in my opinion, a get what you pay for kind of a train wreck. It looks really cool. This engine right here, it's got the Pro Comp heads, which again, just those are kind of cheap Chinese heads, but they've got good parts in them. And this manifold, these are not the right gaskets, by the way. These are just a stock set out of a gasket set. This is a 400 small block. The only reason that I have the stock gaskets on there was just to see if the manifold would even touch the heads. It kind of does, but if you look here, let's see if I can get in there. The angle is so far off, it's actually touching right there, right in this area here where there should be a seal or silicone. It's actually metal to metal. This is all the way back against the oil pressure fitting. And even with it all the way back against there, let's see if I can shine a light in here. Well, let me pull the gasket out of there so you can see how badly misaligned this manifold is with the heads. Let's set this manifold back on without the gasket. So these are the 210 intake runner volume, and the ports are pretty tall on these heads. You can see without the gasket, right on the block, there's no gap at all. And then with this pushed all the way back against this fitting, I don't know if you can see in there, get it to focus hopefully, maybe. There's a huge, it's gonna hit about an 1/8 inch of the flat surface of the head instead of lining up with the port. It's a little better back here. It's kind of hard to see. I can't get the thing to focus, but some light in there. Some light in here. So the manifold is shoved as far back as it'll go. And that, oh, it focused for a second. That ridge right there is about 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch. That ridge, and it's on both sides. So the match is bad. I'm gonna attempt to salvage this manifold. I'm gonna grind this out right here so that I can shove the manifold farther back. It's got huge holes for the mounting, so you can move it around quite a bit. You can see how much bigger the mounting hole is than it needs to be. I'm gonna try to shove the manifold back to help with this problem right here. Anyway, I'm gonna try to move this, grind some out of here, move the manifold back, and get the port alignment somewhat better. And then it's not horrible back here, but it's gonna make it worse. When I try to fix how badly misaligned the front ridge right there is like 3/16 of an inch. Can't really see that one. But yeah, it's bad. The manifold needs to slide back a lot more, and it's pretty badly misaligned, and it's got this huge gap between the, like you have to tip the manifold to get the angle even right so it'll mate with the head. One other thing is sliding this manifold back. This is the distributor hole. That's the block that it's got a seal on, and it's just about probably 2/3 of the way exposed as it is. And so if I grind this so I can slide the manifold back further, this is almost going to not even be sealed, which then begs the next question: how is the alignment? This hole looks like it's way too big, or way bigger than it needs to be for the distributor, but how is it going to be aligned with the oil pump drive and down there where it's got to mesh in? Another thing is that you can see how far off center that hole is. This is shoved as far back as it can go. That is badly misaligned. And yet the front ones are pretty centered. In fact, this one could actually get slid back even more to center it perfectly in the front. So you're way too far back already in these back ones, and you're not even far enough back yet on the front ones. It's like the spacing is off by a lot on these gigantic holes that they have in the manifold to bolt it on. This thing's pretty much a disaster all the way around. I might actually just send it back. We got our 1266 part number intake gaskets. See how thick those are. I think they're 120 on the thickness. So we're gonna pull this off. It's just sitting there. Put those thick gaskets on. Let's see if they're tall enough for these tall ports and thick enough so that the manifold is not sitting right on the rail, and it'll actually seal it up. You can see it's pretty centered on the hole, but we're blocking the port a little bit. I got to raise the gasket up, so now you can see it's not centered in the hole, but there's room. If you pull the gasket up, see if I can get it, see the port. So the gasket's actually going to line up with the manifold. That's the problem. As you can see, this exposure here, well, the manifold's going to line up about perfect with the gasket, and then it hits this wall, which is not ideal. It only does it on one side, really thick, so they should seal. That actually helped. Now we got a gap here, right here. We need to be able to get a gasket. Oh, we won't use a gasket. We'll use silicone right here, but you can see there's a gap now. And if you look at the gasket, you can see that looks pretty parallel. The manifold looks pretty good on both sides, so that should be good. And then we got big enough holes that I should be able to pull that gasket up high enough to not only seal the top of the port, because that was a problem with the Edelbrock manifold. The ports are so tall it wouldn't cover them. So we should be able to seal up so you don't have a huge vacuum leak. The port alignment is still really bad. Now you can really see how misaligned the port is with the gasket in there. Again, this manifold is shoved against the fitting. And then if you look down the port, you can see how bad the intake runner is missing the port. And again, it's shoved as far back as it can go. So I'm going to grind some of this out right here on the manifold and see if I can get this to line up better. There, now it's really in focus. That's a big, that's a big roadblock for that air to have to hit on the way in there. Here's the other side. I left the light in the same position, and you can see how bad that ridge is. For those that are not sure what I'm talking about here, I got a pointer now, so I'm gonna point and show you what I'm not happy with. And it hits that ridge right there where the tip of that screwdriver is. That manifold needs to line up. It needs to be perfectly flush right there. I ground this out right there, and let's put this back on. See how much further back it is. Oh yeah, now it's about as far back as the bolt holes will allow. Let's see what it did to the port alignment. Oh yeah, that's definitely better. Anyway, it's better, not perfect. They're about even now. It's a little too far back, but this one that was way too far forward is about the same now as this back one. So they're about equally off. Even still, with it pushed as far back as it is right now, you can see that hole is pretty lined up for the bolt. And this was our limiting factor. I ground that out so that I could get this to shove back. But look how far shoved back these bolt holes are. Like, I'm barely gonna be able to get a bolt in there because it's back. It's about as far as it can go on those two, and it might even be a little worse over here. I think, yeah, that one, I might actually have to shove it barely forward, but I think with the gasket in there, it'll work now. Just one last note on this build. If this is like a high-end thing, I would have mocked this all up, and I would gasket match these ports, make these bigger so that they match the manifold, or vice versa, you know, change the manifold opening a little bit so they match. But it's not, this is not a high-end build. It's just gonna be a good running 400 small block. Cam's not that big. It's the Comp 280, 230 at 50 on the duration, intake and exhaust. So it's, yeah, I call it my 230 cam actually, and it's 480 lift. I think the advertised duration is 280, and it's Comp calls it the Comp 280. Very common cam. The heads are the Pro Comp 210s. These are pretty tall. And so I had this manifold. I was just trying to use parts I had, and I was gonna throw this on there. This is an old Edelbrock from probably the 60s, because I've had a bunch of these and I'm old. And I remember back in the day buying Camaros, and these were always on there. So that's probably where this thing even came from. But this part of the manifold right here would not even cover the top of the port. The port was so tall that we were out of luck here. So I had to buy this other manifold. I think it was 125 bucks. And it's not horrible. In fact, Eric Weingartner tested this manifold, and it was like the third best one, surprisingly, even with the horrible port match. I wasn't going for a high dollar best of the best or anything like that. And I just find it hilarious that when I first unboxed it, I went in and I typed on YouTube Chinese intake manifold, and the first video that came up was Eric Weingartner's comparison. He probably had about 13 manifolds sitting on the floor in order of best to worst, and this one was the third best. These are the 1266. You can read that. They're the extra thick intake gaskets, and that seemed to really line things up properly. And you can see even with this big oversized gasket, I'm gonna have to glue it right. It just barely is big enough to cover, or I should say, so it doesn't cover part of the port. It keeps it from doing that. But if I wanted to, you can see how bad the gasket matches the head right there. If the heads were off and disassembled, I could have ground the head out to that spot, and then the manifold actually would fit pretty nice. But again, slow budget build. I'm not gonna do all that, and we're just bolting it together with off-the-shelf parts. I decided rather than try to put the gasket on the head, probably be better to line the gasket up with the port of the manifold, because I can't really move the gasket once the manifold's on and I can't see it. And obviously before it's bolted down, once the manifold's on, you can't really see it. So to try to get in there and move it around would be kind of futile. I got the gasket lined up pretty good. It's glued on the other side. I got silicone around the water jackets. And I put one little ribbon of silicone underneath just to hold it. And it's really thin, so it's not gonna hold the gasket up or make it weird when it tries to seal it. It looks like it's on the edge of the port or over it, but it's not. It's actually, there's a little tiny bit of manifold showing the gaskets back just slightly. And the gaskets, like flipping them end for end and flipping them over, this divider piece was like clear out, hanging out into the port. And so I got them kind of flipped the way they fit the best. The gasket's not hanging out into the port anywhere. And like on this edge, it looks really close, but if you look, you can just see the aluminum right there. So the gasket's like almost flush. It's like almost a perfect gasket match just on that one port, but it's pretty lined up with the manifold, and that's about as good as it's gonna get with the heads once the manifold's bolted on. I don't like to let this stuff tack up at all once I've put it on. So silicone to the corners, silicone on the block. And again, this rail, the manifold's gonna be pushed so far back that a bunch of this is gonna be exposed. I'll show after the manifold's on, but basically just want to make sure it's sealed right up against where the head gasket peeks out from underneath there, so I don't have any oil leaks. And I'm going to stick the manifold on right now. One other small detail, kind of a big deal actually. This manifold is drilled for an early style bolt setup. It's also got the vortex head, so you could run that manifold. And I didn't realize it until after the manifold was glued down. But those holes, those vortex holes, are not blind. They go through. So I put silicone in that one. The next one back, you could just see the top of it peeking out from under the gasket. Same thing on this side. So, and same thing in the back. And then the other little weird anomaly is the manifold barely covers, well, not barely, it covers the top of the port, but the gasket doesn't come up to the top of the manifold. So I was worried that it wasn't going to seal because the port is really tall. And previously I had mentioned that I messed around with the gaskets, and let's see if I can get it to focus. So this is the gasket right here. You can see a little bit of gasket exposed. There's a little less gasket sticking up out of there than there is on this side. And so I actually loosened the manifold. These aren't the final bolts. I'm gonna go buy all new bolts. And I like everything really clean and detailed and crisp. But I needed to bolt it down so the silicone could dry and whatnot, and then I'll just change it one bolt at a time. And I didn't have new ones here, but I actually loosened all the bolts up, and I shifted the manifold just slightly to the driver's side bank, or the left bank, 1357 bank, to get this the same height. It was barely lower on this head, and it was barely higher on this head. So I loosened the manifold and rotated it just barely while the glue was still wet. This is that right stuff, silicone. It's super gnarly once it's dry. Made the mistake of gluing a dry sump pan on with that one time and practically had to ruin the oil pan to get it off because that stuff is so strong once it's cured out. So anyway, I had the valve covers off to check this where the gasket right here at the top. I just want to make sure it was sealed, and it is. And then it's got the Crower Enduro roller rockers on it. It's got Howard's chromoly 080 wall push rods, and yeah, should be a stout, nice little piece. 750 double pumper for the carb.